We're studying Let Not Your Heart Be Troubled. It's a detailed look at the book of John, 14, 15, 16, and 17. This morning, after today, we've only got 8 classes left of this quarter, and then this quarter's over. That doesn't seem like it should go that fast, but it has. This morning, we're going to look at John, the 16th chapter. My task is to do verses 19 through 23. I told Matt did a great job on Wednesday night. He had a lot. Matt took 2 classes and covered 3 lessons for us. So he was doing his best to cover 15 verses in those 2 classes because we had the one class taken out last Sunday. So he did a great job at that. He said, I told him on Wednesday night, I said, I wanted to make a couple comments, but I knew you were trying to get done. He said, I was trying. And he did a good job at that. I do want to make a couple of comments about a couple of things and one of the things, this is one of the comments that I wanted to make. There is a word that Matt kept referencing in almost every few sentences or every few phrases that he would talk about, and it's the word all. The word all. Because, and we're going to pick up reading here in just a minute, but in the 16th chapter of the book of John, one of the verses that I just think is just so key for us, and Matt covered this greatly, I want to punch it a little more even. It's the 13th verse. When Jesus says, but when He, the Spirit of truth, comes, He will guide you into, here's our word, all the truth. For He will not speak on His own initiative, but whatever He hears, He will speak, and He will disclose to you what is to come. That's an important verse for us. That's an important word, the word all. And what I want you to think about is, it didn't say some. It didn't say a portion of. It didn't say a little bit of. It didn't say almost all of. It said all. And that's how, we talked about this before in this class, how it is so easy to just skim over some stuff and not really pay attention. Not that we're not paying attention, but not zeroing in on what our text says. That is important that it says all, and we should take comfort in that. Even on down in verse 15 where it says, all things that the Father has are mine. Therefore I said that He takes of mine and will disclose it to you. That verse tells us the same thing, but it tells us something. I want to read 2 passages, one in Matthew and one in Luke. And I want us to listen to what these say. In Matthew, the 11th chapter, verse 27, listen to Jesus' words here. It says, all things have been handed over, notice the word all things have been handed over to me by my Father. And no one knows the Son except the Father, nor does anyone know the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wills to reveal Him. Then let's flip over to Luke, the 10th chapter, and verse 22. Jesus here still speaking. It says, notice our word again, all things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows who the Son is except the Father, and who the Father is except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wills to reveal Him. Those are important things. What we have to think about is God has given everything to the Son. And the Son, Jesus, our Savior, He tells it to His people through the Spirit. And the Spirit who's going to guide the apostles. Here we have the Father, we have the Son, and we have the Spirit. Well, This is what I think about. The apostles couldn't fully appreciate what God had done for them yet. You know, and I don't want to accuse them of something they didn't do, but they are with Jesus. And Jesus is, in the man-human form. I sometimes think, I wonder if they might not necessarily, if they're equating him with human. I hope they don't do that. I hope they're not putting themselves on the same plane with him by not realizing who he is, which I do think they know who he is. I think they know what he is. But and we've talked about this before, from their vantage point, they are confused. And we as sitting here, having the New Testament, we've got the upper hand on them because we understand what's about to happen. All these things are new to them, and they're having a hard time understanding that. I don't want to be disrespectful about in what I'm fixing to say, but I want us all to think about something, because I think this is applicable to each and every one of us in here. Do you, and this is a question you have to answer for yourself, do you remember, and I want you to think about your parents, okay? And that's what I mean. I don't mean any disrespect to any of our parents, okay? But do you remember how dumb your parents were when you were between the ages of, let's say, late teens, early 20s? Do any of you have a recollection of that? There's a few of you shaking your heads. Okay, and then let's spring on forward a few years. Could this possibly be, and I'm not trying to equate our parents to God or our parents to Jesus, but in the same way, I want us to understand something. Just like we do with our parents, have you ever had a time where you didn't see or you didn't understand something that they wanted you to do? Or at least you didn't. Now, when you get, when your hair starts to get gray with, as those birthdays click along, has it ever happened that you come to understand maybe better what they were asking of you? Or why they had you do certain things? Gene, you had a grin on your face. Does that bring that home to us? It really does. It really does. Think about it like this. As we get older, as we have more experiences, or as we're going through things, sometimes those things that we didn't understand, they come into full view, don't they? That's where they were. On a much higher plane, we all understand, but that's where they were. Dale, did you have a comment?
I did. You realize you've done that when you realize you're saying the same words and the things that your parents have told you that you're telling your kids.
That's right. And how many of us have said, I'll never say that. I'll never say because I told you so. Nobody probably ever said that, did they? Man, when I have kids, I'll never say that. Then we say that, don't we? We have a hard time comprehending. We think we know so much, or we only know a certain thing. But in a little while, they're going to come to understand. I want to read a verse from the book of Isaiah. It's in the 65th chapter, verse 24. In the 65th chapter of Isaiah, verse 24. I want you to listen to this, and then we're going to think about this as we read our text for this morning. These are God's words, okay? Verse 24 says, "It will also come to pass that before they call, I will answer. And while they are still speaking, I will hear." Now those are God's words. The corollary to that are Jesus' actions in the 16th chapter in verse 19. Let's listen, let's reflect on what that said in the book of Isaiah, and let's listen to John, the 16th chapter, and we'll read verse 19 through 23. I'm going to back up to verse 16 just to start that thought. And you can notice in 16 through 19, I believe, if I counted right, there's 7 times that the phrase "a little while" is mentioned. But in verse 16 it says, Jesus speaking, of course, "A little while and you will no longer behold me, and again a little while and you will see me." Some of his disciples, therefore, said to one another, "What is this thing he is telling us? A little while and you will not behold me, and then again a little while and you will see me. And because I go to the Father," and so they were saying, "What is this that he says, a little while? We do not know what he's talking about." You see where they are? Verse 19 picks up. Jesus knew that they wished to question him. And he said to them, "Are you deliberating together about this that I said, a little while, and you will not behold me, and in again a little while, and you will see me? Truly, truly, I say to you, that you will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice. You will be sorrowful, but your sorrow will be turned to joy. Whenever a woman is in travail, she has sorrow because her hour has come. But when she gives birth to the child, she remembers the anguish no more, for joy that a child has been born into the world. Therefore you too now have sorrow, but I will see you again, and your heart will rejoice, and no one takes your joy away from you." And we'll end with verse 23 where it says, "And in that day you will ask me no questions. Truly, truly, I say to you, if you shall ask the Father for anything, he will give it to you in my name." Well, I want you to see the actions of Jesus as we read that text. And what Jesus does, it sounds like God's words as he spoke through the prophet Isaiah. Now, I want us to realize that their question, and in their minds, they're looking at each other. And there are some people who think that they were whispering amongst themselves. There are others who think they were just talking, at a regular, volume amongst themselves. But Jesus knew that they questioned him. He knew that they were having a difficult time with this. If Jesus, when we think about their question, if Jesus wanted to be the founder, or if he wanted to begin this kingdom, the logical question for them to ask, or if we were there with them, the logical question for us to ask was, then why are you going away? And that's what they couldn't understand. But if he didn't wish to start it, then why would he return? This doesn't make any sense. Well, for you and me, the rain and the clouds are gone, and we can see clearly because we know what happens. But for them, they're still in the fog. For the disciples, all of these things are still a mystery to them. Now, it's not that they don't believe what he says, but this is all foreign. This is all new stuff. The objections that they would have and the questions that they would have, I want us to understand that they'd just be natural for them. If we were there with them, they'd be natural for us. You know, when we think about the world today, and I'm not talking about necessarily all of us who are in this room. Now, all of us have troubles, and we question from time to time. But there is a world full of people out there who, if one of us were to talk to them about Bible things and about God, the time in our country once was where almost anybody you would come in contact with would know something about God. That's not the case today. It's just not. Things have changed. So we need to think about that and think about where they were, think about where we are. Not one of them, as far as the text tells us, asked any question of Jesus directly. But Jesus moves to comfort them. He knows that they're trying. I don't know. It doesn't tell us. I don't know if he overheard what they were saying. We know he knew their minds, of course, but maybe he could see their faces. But the one thing that we've talked about this before, is the fact that Jesus cares about them. Now they care about him too. He's been the one that they've been following, and that they're looking in the future, not very long off now. They're going to lose him. They're going to lose the one that they've been looking to. They're going to lose their leader, basically. Remember back in verse 5 of chapter 16, it says, "But now I'm going to him who sent me, and none of you ask me, where are you going?" But he knows. He knows, and he moves. We can be reminded that they would hear these things read, just as we're talking about our advantage over them of being able to read those things. But if we put ourselves where they were, they all didn't walk around. They didn't have several copies of a Bible like you and I do. That's where we have the upper hand on. We have the advantage on them. But put yourself where they were. Remember, the first readers of John, they wouldn't have been readers. They would have been hearers. They would have been sitting there listening to the Word. When Sean's back in the booth this morning, and when he and Curtis taught how we got the Bible class, Sean was talking about, and I don't know the specific names of what this is, but when he talked about how a child, when you're trying to get them to learn and stuff like that, I remembered he talked about taking, I think it was a PVC pipe, and you're putting it up and you're talking into one and it's going in your ear. And he's giving me the thumbs up on that. It's a device that it's putting what you're saying into your ear. Sometimes I get accused of this a lot. I talk so much that I don't even know what to say it. Yeah, some people are like that. I've got that gift, I guess. But there is something to be said for that. Think about it, and I would. This would be my take on this. This would be my suggestion. If you have a verse that you're trying to understand and you're having difficulty with, try this. Either listen to it on your computer or listen to it on your phone. Or you know what a lot of times helps? Stand up and read it out loud to yourself. It's the same thing. Or get a piece of PVC pipe and make you it's kind of like a personal phone, really, is what that's doing. And it's or you know what? These smartphones, you can record stuff on them and stick that thing up to your ear. And you can hear it. Try not to pay attention to how you sound, but listen to the words being spoken. That's how these men, as they sat there with Jesus, that's how they were hearing these things. That's how they were getting. They weren't reading it out of a Bible or the many copies of the Bible that they had. And that'll just help us. It really will. That's just how they would have heard. They would have heard the Word. When we think about the verse, faith comes how? By hearing, and hearing from the Word of God. It would have been read aloud in worship service, or it would have been read aloud in other gatherings that they had. Well, if we go back there, we would have heard John's gospel read for the first time. And one phrase would have stood out because of repetition. And that's just how our minds work. That's why it's important. That's why it's important for the repetition in our kids' Bible classes. That's why it's important for us to keep repeating things. And if we don't get it the first time, go back and read it again. It's repetition, repetition. You know, if you took just one chapter out of the Bible and you let your phone read it to you every day on the way to work for 30 days, do you know whether you want to or not, you will have memorized that chapter. You have no control over that. That's just how our minds work. That's how God made our minds. That's learning. That's learning. That's being able. Randy, did you raise your hand? I'm sorry. I saw a hand over there. I'm sorry. But that's how our minds work. That's just how that works. And this is going to ring in their minds. And what's going to ring in their minds is this: we will see Jesus again in a little while. Now, they were confused about that, but that statement, we will see Jesus again in a little while, in a little while, in a little while, in a little while we're going to see Jesus. And you know, still today, that should comfort us. That should comfort us that in a little while. The problem is that we're on our time frame and not God's. So in a little while to us means, well, if we were to go around the room, I could ask everybody, well, what does a little while mean to you? Well, what does a few mean to you? You know, I know what a couple is. A couple's two. A few to me always meant three. Well, does that mean 3 minutes or 3 hours or 3 years or, 300 years? What does that mean? Everybody has something different but this is on God's time and not our time. It is, he tells us, if there's any comment or question, just wave your hand. If I don't have my glasses on, I can't see your hand go up very good. Just wave your hand. Dale will bring you the mic if you've got a comment or question about some of this. He tells us in verse 20 that he says that they will weep just as one who lost a loved one. But that the world will be glad. Now my question to us is, I think we can understand, why will they be weeping? We talked about this already. Why will they be weeping?
He's going to be gone.
Because he's going to be gone. He's going to die. He's going to be separated from them. And this is not just, they're not just sniffling just a little bit. They're crying out. They're wailing. In the East, they would have been, what is the word? It's a funeral dirge. They would have been lamenting. They would have been crying out where you could hear them. They would have been wailing. All of us in here have lost loved ones, and that is difficult. It is difficult on the ones who remain, isn't it? And our hearts hurt, and sometimes we do cry out. And we sob and things like that. And those are things that we can understand. And that's where they were. They're fixing to lose Jesus. They're fixing to lose the one. Really, and I don't want to make this sound not as important as it is, because it's very important. A child, how important is a security blanket to a child? Whatever, it may not be a blanket, but maybe something else. How important is that to a child? Very. You have a child or a grandchild or a great-grandchild. That's very important to that child. He was, in fact, really their security blanket. I mean, he was their go-to. He was their, this is going to date me. Years ago, there was a show on television. Can't think what it's called right now. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Isn't it, I think? And you phoned a friend, if you needed something. Well, I mean, and I don't want to trivialize that. But he was their go-to person. He was there to answer those questions that they needed answering. He was there to comfort them. He was there to keep them on track. And just think about like this. When we put ourselves in that position, how many of us need someone like that? Can we all raise our hands at that? Don't we all need someone like that? Yeah, Dale's shaking his head. Yeah, Debbie is. We do. We need somebody to keep us on the right path. Turn back to Matthew, the 27th chapter for just a moment. In Matthew, the 27th chapter, verse 42. In Matthew 27 and verse 42. It says, He saved others. He cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him now come down from the cross, and we shall believe in him. He did better than that, though, didn't he? You know, if he had come down from the cross under his own power, would they have believed in him? Todd's shaking his head, no. No, they wouldn't have believed. Oh, there may have been one or two that did. There may have been a few that did. But no, they wouldn't have believed in him. But he did better than that. He did better than that. He not only was removed from that cross and put in the tomb, but what happened? He came back. He didn't just get off the cross. And that would have been something to have seen. In the condition that he was in, for him to can you imagine standing at the foot of the cross and seeing him get off of that cross under his own power? But how much more it would be to see him come out of that grave. And that's what he did. Go ahead, Dale.
The rich man's brothers wanted God to send Lazarus back, and they will believe. He said, no, not even send someone back from the dead. Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, and it comes to our day and time, and, you know, people said this, well, I'll believe. If he goes out there and raises somebody up in the graveyard, yeah, that'll make me believe. And I'll, quite frankly, I'll tell you, if I think humanly, I'm going to tell you, I'll use Dale as an example. If Dale calls me one day and says, hey, let's go out to the cemetery, and he and Dale were to raise somebody up, I'm going to tell you that's going to be pretty impressive. And I may think, man, I may need to listen to Dale. Now we all know that's not going to happen. But we can think, and maybe that's why we say that. Well, is it always something that we know can't happen? You know, well, if just this would happen, then I'll believe. But we're not the one that makes the rule. You know, our illustration that Jesus gives is a woman in childbirth. And I'm going to tell you, I'll just speak for all the men in here. None of us can understand that because we haven't experienced it. We may have witnessed it. And I can remember witnessing it. And I'm going to tell you, from the man's standpoint, I was scared to death. I mean, they put a gown on me and they just kind of put me where, you just stand over here, And I was afraid to move. But that's pain. I'm not going to be on the list to sign up to trade places with anybody on that one. Any of you men don't do that? I don't see none of yours head moving. Are you going to trade with any women on that? I'm not. That's pain. But then what happens? When that life is born, somehow or another that pain, that's why men don't have babies. Because we would never forget that pain. Am I right? David? That's true. We wouldn't. And we'd keep bringing that pain up all the time. But the illustration, we have to think, that would be so difficult to bear. They would forget their sorrow. They were involved in, they had the grief, but that grief would be short-lived. This is the thing we need to remember about that, is their sorrows, you know, we can have sorrows. How many of us in here have had sorrows? Shake, I need some head nodding. We've all had sorrows, haven't we? And if we hadn't, just hang on, it's coming. We've all had sorrows. And then there are things that replace our sorrows with joy, isn't there? Have you had times of joy too? And we understand that? That's not what this is. How many of us have had the same event that brought sorrows? This same event that brought their sorrows, that same event that made them mourn and weep and lament, that same event is going to bring their joy. For us, usually not the case. Usually it's something else that turns our sorrow to joy, isn't it? Not the case, not their case. That's still us today. If we could spend an entire class period talking about the crucifixion and the horrors of that and how heinous that was, and we can all be in agreement that it is a horrific thing for that to have happened to Jesus. Can't we all be in agreement that is the case? I think that we can. At the same time, I think we can all be in agreement that we are so glad that happened. That should bring us joy because He was willing. God, number one, was willing to give Him. He was willing to die for us. And so we could be saved. That should still today bring us joy. That's where we have the upper hand on them because they didn't realize all that was going on. They didn't realize just yet all that was happening. Just like no one can take that pain away from a mother who has the pain in childbearing, and no one can take that joy when that newborn arrives, no one can take that away. That joy is there. No one can take away from these men. The events that are going to happen, what I wrote in my notes is, this would cause them to look at everything different. The things that were about to occur will cause them to look at everything different in their lives from now on. It'll cause them to look even at their very lives. They're going to look at them differently. Here's my question to us. Is that the same for you and I? Do the events that they are fixing to experience, does that make us look at everything differently? Think about that. Todd, Dale will bring you the mic.
The thing that we have to remember is this is a continuing story. Mm-hmm. Okay. We began our study in the 14th chapter from "Let not your heart be troubled." Their hearts were troubled. If they were not troubled, they were soon to be troubled. Right. Because He's unloading a lot of information on them. Okay. This is what's going to happen, and it's going to happen in short order. He's done told them that He was going to be betrayed. Their leader, which was Peter, okay, you're going to betray me also. And these men are sitting around, they can't believe all these are going to happen. And the same correlation is with, I've never experienced childbirth, I have witnessed it, okay? But when this thing starts, okay, at the end of the 16th chapter, the last thing He's going to tell them is, I have overcome the world. and then he's going to pray with them. Things are set into motion. As soon as the prayer is over with, here we are. It's live action. These men, Peter even said, I'm ready to die for you, okay? Before any of your children were born, you probably had a plan. We were going to get in the car. We were going, it happens. It's live action, okay? There's no slowing it down. And you don't believe how real it is until you are in the heat of the moment. That's what these men, and he's trying to prepare them. He can't prepare them because as soon as the prayer is over with, here the men come. And then it's real. And then these men are not going to believe what's happening, and they're all going to forsake him. They're all going to run away from him.
It's the same, and that's a good analogy, Todd. It's the same as when, as a parent, or it holds true, I guess, more as a parent, but as anybody, we say, just trust me.
Yes.
I've lived through this before.
Yes.
How many times has a parent told us that, or somebody, maybe one of our friends told us that? Get back on. One of our friends has told us that, that, hey, trust me, I've lived through this before. Don't do, and then fill in the blank. And that's what he's telling them. Hey, you'll be comforted. You need to be comforted. Microphone died. But that's what I think it's back on. That's what he's telling them. But those things are hard. I mean, think back. Whatever the situation is, when a friend has said, please don't do this, you'll be sorry. Or when a parent says, please don't do this, you'll be sorry. Those are hard to hear, aren't they?
Well, they're hard to hear because you're seeing it from a distance. When you're standing in it up to your knees, when you're looking at it from a distance, you think you can slow it down. Just like when Renee gave birth. Once that thing started, there ain't no slowing it down. And these men are going to realize this when these men come up to Jesus, there's no slowing it down. This thing is going to happen. And you can't stop it. And it's going to happen in just the way that God wants it to. And they're going to be troubled about that. We think about that, and I think sometimes that we want only good things to happen because I'm following God. And throughout, these men, I'm sure that's where they were. I mean, it couldn't get any better than this. I mean, don't get me wrong, they were enduring some persecutions, but hey, they got Jesus. And, I mean, we're going to rally around Jesus. But here, a horrific event is going to happen in their mind, and it is a horrific event, but it's a needed event to make sure that God's plan works out the way it should. But we can be just like that. But all throughout the Bible, we could start at the beginning and go to the end, and all throughout the Bible we can come to see that there were bad things and sometimes bad people, but guess what? Good things came out of that. And good results came from that. So we can't always center on that, and I think sometimes we do. We center on that and say, well, we want to stomp our feet and throw a hissy fit and say, well, that's not the way I wanted it. And that's right. That's not the way we wanted it. But that may not be the way that it needs to be to work out. Remember, we're on God's time and not ours. Our world tells us, I want it and I want it now.
And not only do I want it now, I want it within 60 seconds. Dale, did you raise your hand?
I did have a thought, though. Before the garden, the Lord's telling the disciples or the apostles what's going to happen, and Peter says, no way. And even though they forsake you, I won't. Well, Jesus is right there then. And then in the garden, when the soldiers came up, Jesus is right there. Peter's brave. He grabs a sword and wants to fight all those soldiers. Mm-hmm. But just a few minutes later, a few hours later, Peter denies Christ. Christ is not right there by him. He's not too far away from him. But that's the way we are. When I was in elementary school, of course, Mom started taking us to church when I was about 3 or 4 years old, so I don't ever remember not going to church. But I remember thinking, as I was in elementary school, I tried to visualize that the Lord is right there by me, and it kept me out of a lot of trouble. As I got older and had more passions and more desires and wanted to do what I wanted to do, that kind of let that idea kind of get away from me. But anyway, that's what I want to say.
Well, that's so true. And that's a good thing. But we need to realize that when we put on Christ and we choose Christ, He is there with us. I mean, we have to keep that. We have to keep thinking about that. You know, when you talk about that, when I was younger, that's one of the things that kept me from doing wrong things was I didn't want my parents to be disappointed in me. And I'm gonna tell you, I don't really know how you teach that. But I think if we could teach that particular thing, that would work really good. And I don't, for the life of me. And I don't know that they could tell you how. I don't know that they taught that. I think it's just there or it's not. But I think that keeps a lot of us from doing a lot of things because we don't want to disappoint. We don't want to disappoint our parents, or we don't want to disappoint God. And that works. They would come to not only understand, but they would come to appreciate what was going on. You know, up until now, they'd ask Jesus themselves, or they'd pray to the Father, but now they're going to come to the Father in Jesus' name. They're going to have the Spirit to lead them. We've got the Word that leads us. That's how the Spirit operates in us. It's through His Word. We've got that information. One of the things that's so important, and I kept thinking, I wanted to make a 2-word comment when Matt was teaching, and I've thought this for several class periods. Have any of you in here ever been on what's called, I call it information overload? You ever had that? Sometimes it makes us not be able to function well. You know, we've got all this stuff coming at us. That's where they were. I mean, the Lord told them, you know, I've got more. There's more you need to know, but you just can't take it right now. He didn't use the word information overload. I didn't make that up. I heard it somewhere, but I like it. And sometimes I can get on information overload. And sometimes we just can't comprehend all the things that are being thrown at us. And that's difficult. But He knew exactly what they needed. And He's saying, don't let your hearts be troubled. You know, He had more things, but you just can't bear them right now. Thank you for your comments and your questions.